Take a look at this. This hand plane in my hand belonged to my grandfather and to his father before him. It is well over 100 years old, and it works. Today, this morning, as sweet and true as the day it was made. The blade takes an edge like glass. The wood is smooth and sound. There is not a speck of rust on it. 100 years of work in 3 generations of hands, and it is ready to shave a curl of oak right now. It never once went to a store to be replaced because it never once needed replacing. Now go into the average garage in town, and you will find the opposite story. A drawer full of tools bought in the last 5 years, and half of them already ruined. The saw gone dull and speckled with rust. The hammer with its head working loose on a cracked handle. The good chisel pitted and blunt. The pruning shears seized up stiff. All of it bought new not long ago, and all of it already halfway to the trash, to be replaced with more of the same that will also be in the trash in 5 years. That man will buy the same tool 3, 4, 5 times in his life and never understand why his tools die and his grandfather's did not. So here is the question that ought to trouble him, and it is the question we answer today. Is the steel weaker now than it was? Are the handles worse? Well, some of the cheap ones are, that is true, and we will talk about that. But it is not the whole answer, and it is not even most of it. Because I have seen men take a good tool, as good as any grandfather ever owned, and ruin it in 3 seasons. And I have seen men take a cheap tool off the hardware store rack and keep it working sweet for 30 years. The difference is almost never the tool. The difference is the man, and what he knows, and the few small things he does, or does not do, to care for it. And here is the part that will surprise you, and it is the good news in it. Those few small things cost almost nothing. There is no secret expensive treatment, no special tool you must buy. The whole of it comes down to a can of oil that costs a few dollars and lasts for years. A dry place to hang a thing, a few minutes now and again. And a way of thinking about your tools that the old folk had and most folks have lost. Do these plain things, and a cheap tool will outlast you. Fail to do them, and the finest tool ever forged will be ruined inside a few years. The tool does not much care what it cost. It cares how it is kept. I am going to give you 5 plain things the old folk did that made their tools last 100 years and more, and near every one of them cost you next to nothing and takes but a few minutes. And I am going to tell you the one honest warning about the most useful of them, that can start a fire in your shed if you do not heed it. So stay with me for that, for it matters. So come out to the shop with me, and let us talk about tools, and how to keep them so they outlive you, and go on working in your grandchildren's hands. Quick word before we start. If you are the sort who would rather keep a good thing working than keep buying cheap ones, who take some satisfaction in caring for what you own, then you and I will get along, and I would be glad if you would subscribe. There is another old skill here every week. Now, out to the bench. We begin with the wooden handles, for that is where most good tools die first, and where the cheapest, plainest care does the most good. And the whole secret is one humble can of oil that costs a few dollars at any hardware store and will care for every wooden handle you own for years. Boiled linseed oil. Write that name down, for it is the single most useful thing in this whole video. Here is why the handle dies, and why the oil saves it. A wooden handle, on an axe or a hammer or a shovel or a rake, is a living thing, or was. And bare, uncared-for wood does 2 bad things over time. In the dry, it dries out, and shrinks, and grows brittle, and cracks, and that is when the axe head works loose and flies off, or the handle snaps in your hands mid-swing. And in the damp, it drinks up water, and swells, and then it rots. Dry and crack or wet and rot That is how nearly every good handle dies, and both come from the same thing: bare wood left to the mercy of the weather. Now here is what the boiled linseed oil does, and it is a small wonder. You wipe it onto the bare wood with a rag and let it soak in a while, and wipe off what is left over, and it dries. But it does not just sit on top like paint. It soaks down into the wood and then it hardens, right inside the wood, into a tough film that lets the wood breathe but keeps the water out. A handle treated with linseed oil does not dry and crack in the dry because the oil keeps it from drying out, and it does not swell and rot in the wet because the oil keeps the water from soaking in. One treatment, and then a fresh coat maybe once a year, and that handle will stay sound and strong and smooth for a lifetime. My grandfather's tools got their linseed oil every winter for 100 years, and that is the plainest reason they are still whole. And here is a bit of plain wisdom the store will not tell you, because there is no money in it for them. When you buy a new tool with a wooden handle, and the handle is all shiny with a slick varnish or lacquer on it, that shine is often not a good sign. It is a warning. A thick, shiny varnish is frequently used to hide cheap, poor wood underneath. The best handles, the hickory and ash that the old toolmakers used, were often left bare and unfinished because good wood does not need to be hidden. So the plain old move, and I do it with every new tool, is this. Take a bit of fine sandpaper and sand that slick varnish right off, back to the bare wood, and then oil it with the linseed oil instead. You will have a better handle for it, one that grips dry in your hand instead of slick, that you can feel the wood of, and that the oil can actually get into and protect. A bare oiled handle beats a shiny varnished one every day of the week. Now hear me close, because here is the one honest warning I promised you, and it is important, and most folks selling you linseed oil will bury it in fine print. The rag. The rag you wipe the oil on with. When linseed oil dries, it gives off heat as it hardens. That is part of how it works. And if you wad that oily rag up and toss it in a corner or a bin, that heat can build up inside the wad with nowhere to go, and it can get hot enough, all on its own, with no spark and no flame, to catch fire. Oily rags left in a heap have burned down many a shed and barn. So you never, ever wad up a linseed oil rag and throw it in the corner. When you are done, you take that rag outside and you lay it out flat and single, on the concrete or hung over a rail in the open air, where the heat can escape as it dries, and once it is dry hard, you can throw it out safe. Lay it flat outside to dry, never wad it up. Remember that, and the oil is your friend for life. Forget it, and it can burn your shop down. That is the honest, whole truth of it, both the good and the danger, the way you deserve to hear it. Now here is the beautiful thing, and it ties right back to the last one. That same can of boiled linseed oil, or a bit of plain oil of near any kind, is also what keeps the steel of your tools from rusting away. The one cheap can does double duty, wood and metal both. And rust, make no mistake, is the great killer of the metal tool, the way cracking is the killer of the handle. You know rust when you see it, the orange scale, but you may not know how little it takes to start, and how it never stops once begun. All rust needs is bare steel, a little moisture from the very air, and time. That is all. A good chisel or plane blade or saw left bare in a damp shed will begin to rust from the moisture in the air alone, no rain needed. And once it starts, rust pits the steel, and a pitted blade will not take a clean edge nor make a clean cut ever again. Rust does not just make a tool ugly, it eats the working surface and ruins it for good. And the plain old cure is the same as for the wood. Put a thin coat of oil between the bare steel and the air, and the rust cannot start, for it cannot get at the steel. After you use a tool, before you hang it up, you take an oily rag, one kept just for this, and you give the metal a quick wipe, a thin film of oil over the blade and the head. That thin film is a wall the moisture cannot cross, and the steel stays bright and clean under it for years. It takes 5 seconds. Wipe it down before you put it away, every time, and your steel never rusts. My grandfather did it without thinking, the way you would wipe your boots at the door. And it is the whole reason his 100-year-old blades have not a speck of rust on them today. For the tools you are putting away for a season, the garden tools come winter, you go a bit heavier. A good thick wipe of oil over all the bare metal before they hang up for the cold months, so they come out in spring as clean as they went in. And here is a further plain trick for the toolbox or the drawer where you keep your good steel. Toss in a couple of those little packets of drying gel that come in with new shoes and pill bottles, the ones that say, "Do not eat," for they drink the damp right out of the air in that closed space and keep your tools dry. Folks throw those away by the handful. Save them, toss them in your toolbox, and they fight the rust for free. A wipe of oil and a dry box, and the steel outlives you. Let me stop just a moment here in the middle. If you are getting some good from this, the plain kindness that keeps this channel going and it costs you nothing at all, is to tap that subscribe. It carries these old ways along to more folks who are tired of buying the same tool twice. That is the whole of the ask. Now to the third, and it is about where a tool sleeps. The third thing costs you nothing at all, not even a can of oil, and it is simply where and how you put your tools away. For a tool spends most of its life not in your hand, but in storage, resting, and where it rests decides how long it lives, more than almost anything else. Most tools are not worn out by work, they are ruined by bad rest. Here is the plain sense of it. The two great enemies, we have said, are damp and knocking about. So the old way of storing is the way that fights both. First, up off the floor. Never leave your tools lying on the concrete floor of a shed or garage, for the concrete draws and holds the damp, and a tool lying on it sits in that moisture and rusts, and gets stepped on and knocked besides. The old way is to hang them up, on the wall, on pegs or nails or hooks, each tool in its place, up in the drier air off the floor. A hanging tool stays dry, stays sharp because its edge touches nothing, and stays whole because nothing is piled on it. And there is a quiet second gift in hanging every tool in its own place. And my grandfather set great store by it. When every tool hangs in its place on the wall, you can see at a glance what you have and what you are missing. And you can see when a thing needs care before it is ruined. The tool left in a heap in a drawer is forgotten and rusts, and its edge is chipped by the other steel piled on it, and you do not even see it happen. The tool on the wall is watched over. There is an old saying, a place for everything and everything in its place, and it was never truer than in the tool shop. It is not just tidiness. It is that a tool you can see is a tool you will keep up, and a tool buried in a pile is a tool you will let die. Now for the fine cutting tools, the good chisels and planes and saws. A bit more care in the resting still. These do not want to knock against other steel at all, for it chips their edges. The old way is to keep them in a wooden chest or a drawer, each with its place, or in a canvas roll, wrapped so the edges touch nothing hard. Wood is kindly to a blade, which is why the old tool chests were made of it. And keep them somewhere the damp does not reach, in the house even, not the damp shed, if they are fine enough to warrant it. A good saw hung on a wooden peg by its handle, a good chisel in a wooden rack or a roll, a good plane resting on its side so its sole is not pressed down. All these old ways of resting a tool add years and years to its life, and every one of them is free. It is not about spending. It is about paying attention to how a thing rests. The fourth thing is about the edge, and it runs deeper than just keeping a tool working, though it does that. It is this: a sharp tool is a safe tool and a lasting tool, and the habit of keeping your edges sharp is the very habit that keeps your tools alive, because the man who sharpens his tools is the man who is paying attention to them. First, the plain truth about sharpness that most folks have backwards. A dull tool is more dangerous than a sharp one, not less. A sharp chisel or axe or knife bites where you aim it and goes where you send it. A dull one skids and slips and glances off, and that is when it slips into your hand or your leg. And a dull tool is harder on itself too, for you must force it, and forcing it bends and strains and breaks it, where a sharp tool slides through easy. So keeping an edge is not fussiness, it is safety, and it is care. The old way was to sharpen a tool before you used it and before you put it away, not after it was already ruined dull. A few strokes on a stone to bring the edge back, regular, a small thing, done often, so the edge never gets far gone. The old folk kept a sharpening stone right there in the shop and used it the way you would sharpen a pencil, a little and often, not waiting for a great grinding restoration. An axe, a hoe, a chisel, a plain iron, a knife, all of them want their edge touched up regular on a stone, and it is a quiet, satisfying few minutes of work, not a chore. And here is one plain caution the old folk knew that saves an edge. Never sharpen a dirty tool, and never grind a caked one. If your blade is gummed with dirt or sap or old grime, clean it first with an oily rag before you take it to the stone, because the grit of dried dirt will tear and ruin the very edge you are trying to put on it. Clean, then sharpen, then oil, then hang it up. That is the whole plain round of it. And notice the deeper thing here, for it is the real point. The man who sharpens his tools regular is the man handling them, looking at them, seeing the loose handle before it flies off, and the first rust spot before it spreads, and the crack before it splits. The sharpening is how you stay acquainted with your tools, and a tool you stay acquainted with is a tool that does not die of neglect. The edge is the excuse. The attention is the gift. The last thing comes before all the others in time, for it is about the tool you choose in the first place, and it is the plainest money wisdom the old folk had. Buy it once, buy the good one once, and care for it, and never buy it again. The cheap tool bought over and over is the dearest tool there is in the end. My grandfather had a saying that he was too poor to buy cheap tools. Think on that a moment, for it sounds backwards, and it is exactly right. The cheap hammer or saw or shears off the bottom of the rack costs you a few dollars less today. But it is made of poor steel that will not hold an edge, and cheap wood that will crack, and it will be dead in a few years, and you will buy it again and again and again. Buy that cheap tool 5 times over 20 years, and you have paid far more than the one good tool would have cost, and you have had poor work out of it the whole while besides. The good tool costs more today and nothing ever again. The cheap tool costs less today and forever after. The poor man, the truly careful with money man, buys the good one once. And here is how the old folk knew a good tool from a poor one. For you can still find good tools if you know the signs, and some of the best are old ones, second-hand. Look at the steel, whether it is solid and well forged, not thin and stamped. Feel the weight and the balance in your hand, for a good tool is balanced to work with you. Look at the handle, and remember what I told you. Good bare hardwood, hickory or ash, straight-grained, is better than a shiny varnished stick hiding cheap wood. And here is a fine secret for the careful buyer. The old tools, your grandfather's era, from before things were made cheap, can often be had at farm sales and second-hand for a few dollars, and a rusty old good tool, cleaned up and oiled and sharpened by the methods I have given you today, will be better steel than almost anything you can buy new at any price. I have restored many a seized, rusty old plane or chisel from a farm sale for $1 or $2, and it outworks the new ones tenfold. Learn to buy the good old steel and bring it back, and you will own better tools than rich men for pennies. So there are the 5 plain things. Oil the handle, oil the steel, hang it dry and in its place, keep the edge sharp with regular attention, and buy the good one once. And you will notice, if you look back over them, that not one of them is about money, and not one is about some clever trick. They are all about the same thing, really, and it is a thing worth naming, because it is the true difference between the tools that last 100 years and the tools that die in 5. It is care. Plain, regular, attentive care. The old tools did not last because the steel was magic. They lasted because a man wiped them down and hung them up and oiled them and sharpened them, a little, regular, for a lifetime, and then handed them to a son who did the same. The tool that lasts 100 years is not a better tool. It is a tended tool. And you can always tell a real craftsman, not by the tools he owns, but by the state of them. The true hand is known by his cared-for tools. The loose nothing, the rust nowhere, the edges keen, every one hung in its place. The tools tell you the man. A man who keeps his tools well keeps everything else well. And a man whose tools are rusted and cracked and dull in a heap, well, that tells you something too. So here is what I will leave you with, and it is a question I would truly like you to answer for me down below. Somewhere in your house or your shed or your father's things, I would wager there is an old tool. A tool that has been in the family, that came down from a father or a grandfather, that has already lasted longer than anything you have bought new. Go and find it. Take it in your hands and look at it, the wear of it, the old care in it. And tell me down in the comments what it is and whose it was. A grandfather's plane, a father's hammer, an old hand-forged hoe. For those old tools are a kind of message, hand to hand down the years, and the message is always the same. Keep me well, and I will outlast you too. I read every one of your comments, and the stories of these old family tools are among the finest things you folks send me. And if you would care to come out to the shop with me again next week for another of the plain old ways of keeping and making and doing, then subscribe, and you will find your way back easy. It is good to have the company at the bench. Until then, wipe down your steel, oil your handles, and hang your tools up dry and in their places tonight. Do that, and the cheapest tool in your shed will be working sweet and true long after you are gone, in hands not yet born. God keep you, friend. We will talk again.